Hello and welcome to Guyana News Updates, your essential source for staying informed on the most significant developments across Guyana. As our nation rapidly approaches the 2025 general and regional elections on September 1st, the political landscape is buzzing with activity and significant shifts. We bring you comprehensive coverage of the internal discord within the country's main opposition parties, highlighting how the APNU plus AFC unity is crumbling. Our updates delve into the formal breakdown in negotiations between a Partnership for National Unity, APNU, and the Alliance for Change, AFC. The AFC has announced its decision to contest the elections independently, while APNU remains open to further discussions even as it prepares its own electoral plans. You'll gain insights from the pointed statements of key opposition figures, such as PNC/our parliamentarian Amanza Waltendesser, who has expressed deep frustration over the prolonged and unresolved negotiations. She warns that the delay is eroding public confidence and weakening the opposition's united front. We also cover AFC Member of Parliament Juritha Fernandez's concerns regarding the strategic rationale behind her party's push for a consensus candidate and the trend of elevating political outsiders to leadership roles without sufficient experience. We delve into the disagreement over the selection of a presidential candidate, noting the AFC's advocacy for a nonpartisan consensus candidate like Carl Greenidge, while APNU insists that its leader, Aubrey Norton, should head the ticket. Furthermore, our channel highlights the recent string of defections from the APNU plus AFC coalition, with several senior members, including former APNU plus AFC government minister Sidney Allicock, publicly supporting the governing PPP/C. Allicock, a respected indigenous leader, cited disillusionment with the opposition state and the PPP/C's commitment to indigenous development as key reasons for his endorsement. We also bring you President Dr. Irfan Ali's perspective on these developments, as he dismisses the APNU plus AFC as a coalition of incompetence and characterizes the PPP/C as the true unifying force in the country, focused on prosperity, opportunity, and unity. Beyond politics, we keep you abreast of Guyana's rapidly changing economic landscape, including new initiatives such as a development bank offering interest-free loans to small businesses. To ensure you never miss an important update, a crucial political insight, or a significant economic development impacting Guyanese citizens, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Join our community at Guyana News Updates, where we aim to enhance your understanding of the key concepts and major events shaping our nation. The discussion begins now.
Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're heading to Guyana. The political temperature there is definitely rising.
That's right. The country's approaching its next general and regional elections, set for September 1st, 2025.
And we've been digging into a collection of recent articles from Newsroom Guyana.
Yeah, and they paint a fascinating picture, maybe a bit tumultuous, of the main opposition coalition. You know, the group that ran last time is APNU plus AFC.
So our mission today is pretty straightforward. We want to unpack the key insights from these reports.
Understand this reported disunity within the opposition, and also how different political players are reacting.
Exactly. We want to help you get the essential story behind the headlines.
We'll hear directly from some opposition figures about their frustration.
We'll also look at a pretty high-profile defection, which seems to signal some shifting allegiances.
And, of course, get the ruling party's take on all these developments.
Okay, let's get into it. The core issue, based on these sources, driving a lot of the political talk in Guyana right now,
is this very public disarray within the opposition bloc, especially with that September election date getting closer.
Yeah, the main opposition, that coalition that brought together APNU, Partnership for National Unity, and the AFC, the Alliance for Change.
Well, they seem to be facing some, let's say, profound internal challenges. The articles really highlight how their efforts to stay united for the election have kind of publicly fallen apart.
Specifically, the sources detail how talks between APNU, which is, largely the PNCR, the People's National Congress Reform,
right,
and the AFC have stalled badly, it seems. The AFC actually announced recently it's going to contest independently.
Yeah, that's a big step. Meanwhile, APNU, mainly the PNCR, they've said, well, they're open to talks.
Right.
But they're also moving ahead with their own separate plans for the election, which is, a huge shift from how they operated together in past elections.
And this isn't happening behind closed doors. The articles really give us a window into the frustration inside the opposition.
They quote sitting members of parliament from both sides of that, well, former coalition.
Let's start with Amanza Walton Desire. She's a PNCR MP, Shadow Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Right. She shared her views on Facebook, and the sources describe her as being, well, deeply frustrated. They even quote her saying she's fed up with how the negotiations were going.
Fed up. That's strong. And she connects it to the time frame, right? Like 6 months of talk.
Exactly. And she says they're no closer to an agreement and actually seem more divided now than before.
So what's the consequence she sees?
Well, her statement really highlights the cost, the political cost, of dragging this out. She warns it's eroding public confidence.
It makes sense.
And weakening the opposition's ability to, present that united front they need.
Yeah.
She goes on to say the opposition risks failing its supporters through all this division and public bickering.
And didn't she have a pretty stark closing line?
Oh, yeah. Very stark warning. Quoted as, "The future will not forgive us. History will not absolve us." That really underlines how serious she feels this is, the potential political fallout.
Absolutely. Okay, we also hear from Jaretha Fernandez, who's an AFC member of parliament.
Right, and according to the sources, she put out a statement questioning her own party strategy in these talks.
What was her main issue?
Her specific concern, as reported, centers on this push for a consensus candidate to potentially lead a joint ticket.
Okay.
What she apparently finds really problematic is that this same idea was, quote, wholly dismissed by senior AFC leaders just a year ago.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, only to reintroduced under different circumstances now and pushed by, get this, the very people who strongly dismissed that idea before.
So that suggests maybe some internal disagreements or strategy shifts within the AFC itself, based on her account.
It certainly seems that way from her perspective.
Yeah.
And she also voiced a broader concern, didn't she, about elevating political outsiders?
Yes, people who might not have enough experience or maybe the long-term commitment needed for governing.
Exactly. She's quoted saying, "Governance is no walk in the park." She really stresses it needs deep knowledge of the system and genuine commitment.
To the people, not just personal ambition.
Right. Commitment to policies for the people, not oneself. And that seems linked to her caution about just picking any candidate.
So we're hearing clear frustration about the process, the strategy, from key figures in both APNU and the AFC. And the sources dig into what they identify as the main reason these unity talks just collapsed.
Yeah, the central sticking point identified in the articles seems pretty clear. Disagreement over who would be the presidential candidate.
Right. The AFC, led by figures like Nigel Hughes, apparently pushed for a nonpartisan consensus candidate.
They even suggested names like former VP Carl Greenidge as examples of that kind of figure.
But he's pushed back on how that was portrayed.
Yes, it's important to note he's reported as rejecting mischaracterizations. He stated the party wasn't demanding the top spot for the AFC, necessarily.
Ah, okay.
But rather pushing for a candidate who was genuinely a unifying figure, regardless of their party background.
Got it. So the emphasis, according to Hughes, was on the type of candidate unifying, not just which party got the presidential slot.
Precisely. While on the other side, APNU's position, as reported, was firm. Their leader, Aubrey Norton, should head the ticket.
End of story, from their perspective, it seems.
Pretty much. And the articles also mentioned something about APNU and the WPA.
Yeah, APNU recently referenced the Working People's Alliance, the WPA, as being part of its structure.
And how are observers reading that?
Well, some see it as a signal maybe of shifting alliances or APNU kind of consolidating its base as it prepares to go it alone without the AFC.
Okay, so this very public falling out, it's not just internal memos and frustration. The sources highlight real consequences playing out publicly.
Absolutely, like significant public disappointment and some notable defections.
Yeah, the impasse has definitely triggered public backlash. The kind of criticism reported is that this looks like political posturing at the expense of national interest.
People aren't happy.
No. The articles mention accusations flying on social media, things like selfishness, failure to prioritize ordinary Guyanese.
And maybe the most tangible consequence, as you said, is this string of defections from the APNU plus AFC coalition.
Yes, several senior members,
Right.
we're talking former ministers, longtime party stalwarts,
Are leaving the coalition.
Exactly. And what's really noteworthy is where they're going. Many are publicly throwing their support behind the governing party, the PPPC.
Let's focus on one specific example the sources highlighted because it seems quite significant. Sidney Allicock.
Yes, Sidney Allicock. He's a very respected indigenous leader, comes from the hinterland. He's a former vice president.
Served under the APNU plus AFC government as Minister of Indigenous Peoples Affairs.
Right. And he comes from the Guyana Action Party, GAP, which is an indigenous party that was part of that coalition.
And now?
Now, the articles state he has publicly endorsed President Irfan Ali and the ruling PPPC for a second term.
That's a huge move for a former VP from a coalition partner. What reasons did he give?
He laid out several, according to the reports. A big one was a growing sense of marginalization for smaller parties, like his, GAP, within the coalition, feeling sort of neglected recently.
He contrasted that with earlier times.
Yeah, he said it felt more inclusive when they started under former President David Granger.
What else?
He also found the recent attempts by the opposition to regroup, specifically meetings between the AFC and PNCR, well, unconvincing and poorly coordinated.
Didn't sound confident.
Not at all. He's quoted saying he was never confident enough that we were ready after those meetings.
And he had a comment about focus, didn't he?
A very telling one. He observed reportedly, everyone seemed to be watching their own presidency, not seeing the bigger picture.
Echoes that internal frustration we heard about earlier.
Absolutely. He basically put the turmoil down to internal power struggles, feeling that original spirit of unity was lost. They couldn't hold on, as he put it.
So, clearly disillusioned with the opposition, but his view of the PPPC and President Ali is different.
Markedly different. He apparently consulted with community members back in the hinterland.
Okay.
And believes President Ali deserves another term. He feels much more could be achieved if Ali continues.
Did he point to specifics?
Yes, he's quoted praising the current government's approach to indigenous development. He cited investments in things like transportation, training, employment in those hinterland areas.
And he had a message for indigenous communities.
Urged them to seize the opportunities available now, warning against complacency.
The sources note this is his personal view, but he thinks others feel similarly.
That's right. He stated his personal position, but he believes others share his views, that they're rethinking their allegiances, seeing the country moving in what he perceives as a positive direction.
And he had a message for undecided voters, too, right?
Yeah, urging them to listen carefully, take their time, make the best choice. And he added this sort of poignant reflection.
About Guyana's potential.
Yes, that Guyana is so rich, but sometimes seems poor in such richness. A powerful thought.
His defection really is significant. It highlights maybe the difficulty the opposition has had keeping its diverse coalition partners and regional leaders on board.
Definitely. And, well, as you expect, the ruling party hasn't been silent about all this opposition turmoil.
Now, President Dr. Irfan Ali's response, as reported, sounds quite forceful, dismissive even.
Very much so. He characterized APNU plus AFC not as a viable alternative government, but as a, quote, coalition of incompetence.
Nice strong words.
And undemocratic forces that he believes are unfit to lead the country.
He brought up past events to back this up.
Heavily. He specifically referenced the contentious 2020 electoral crisis, said they tried to rig an election, made claims like 32 was greater than 33, referring to those vote count disputes.
Okay, what else?
He also accused them of doing serious economic damage when they were in power, citing things like sending home sugar workers, almost collapsing the rice industry, and generally letting the country slide into what he called a disaster.
So how does President Ali frame the opposition's current problems? Is it about policy disputes in his view?
Not really. He frames it purely as a run for power, not a credible policy-driven campaign.
Just ambition.
That's the claim. He argues their focus is on hate, division, and racism, saying they're stuck in the past and not part of coaliting the future.
And the counter-narrative is
that the PPPC, in contrast, has emerged as the true unifying force. He claims his party delivers clear policies, strategies, and results.
And why does he think people, including former opposition supporters, are moving towards the PPPC?
He puts it down to people making an analytical, clear decision, basically comparing their lives and the country under APNU plus AFC versus now under the PPPC.
Makes sense from his perspective. What about welcoming defectors? Does he address that?
He does. He offered what he called a philosophical view on the defections to the PPPC,
which is
saying forgiveness is a part of moving forward. He claims these defectors are framing their move as joining a platform that's better for Guyana, for democracy, and for the rule of law.
But does he acknowledge it might cause some friction within his own party, seeing old rivals join up?
He did acknowledge potential internal discomfort among, longtime PPPC loyalists.
Right.
But he insisted the party's core philosophy overrides that, this idea of inclusivity, national unity.
How did he define that?
As bringing together people of every class, every race, every religion.
So the bigger picture trumps any awkwardness.
That's the argument. He claims the PPP philosophy is ultimately winning, while the opposition's old philosophy of division and anti-rule of law positions is losing.
So projecting a lot of confidence.
Absolutely. Stating, in humility that the PPP is focused on prosperity, opportunity, and unity. And predicting pretty clearly the PPP will go again into government.
It's a complex picture these sources paint. But observers are noting one key implication, right?
Yeah, that this level of fragmentation, this public disarray in the opposition, well, it could seriously weaken their ability to mount a strong, unified challenge to the PPPC government come September.
It really seems like those internal opposition dynamics are shaping up to be just as critical as any policy debates in this election, based on these reports.
Definitely looks that way.
And that brings us towards the end of this deep dive into the Guyanese political scene, drawing from those Newsroom Guyana articles.
Yeah, we've explored that public breakdown of the unity talks.
Heard from frustrated voices inside the opposition camp.
Understood the reported core disagreement over leadership.
Seen the impact of defections, like with Sidney Allicott.
And heard the ruling party's very strong counter-narrative and critique.
These articles really do highlight a political landscape that seems quite fractured, shifting as the election gets closer.
Mm-hmm. And understanding these internal dynamics, the public statements we've discussed, as they're presented in the sources, it feels crucial for really grasping the choices and challenges facing voters in Guyana.
It truly does. So maybe a final thought for you to consider, based just on what these sources have presented. Given all these accounts of internal disarray, the power struggles, the shifting loyalties, what factors do you think might ultimately be the most important in deciding which way voters turn next September?